Jai Gurudev. Today we're reading Chapter 2, Book 1, Reason for Writing the Ramayana. Salutation to the Lord, the Universal Soul, shining manifest in heaven, earth, and the sky, and both within and without myself. This is a very clear reference to the silent witness, isn't it? And so why does he start this way? It's just that reminder. We must always be connected with the silent witness. Verse 2, he is entitled to read this work who is convinced that he is bound, who desires his liberation, and who is neither wholly ignorant nor quite conversant with divine knowledge. Well, that's really an important statement as well. This is an advanced treatise on enlightenment. And those of us that are here, we are advanced students. So we are ideal for this particular study. The wise man who has well considered this work as the first step, and then comes to think on the means of liberation, truly shall be exempt from rebirth. Valmiki, speaking to King Arishtanemi, know, O destroyer of your enemies, that I have written the history of Rama in the Ramayana as a preparatory step to salvation. I gave that history to my attentive pupil, the obedient and intelligent Bharadwaja, as the sea yields its gems for their seeker. The learned Bharadwaja repeated the history of the Ramayana in the presence of Brahma, seated in a certain forest of the Sumuru mountain. Lord Brahma, the great grandfather of the inhabitants of the three worlds, was so highly pleased with him that he addressed him, saying, O my son, ask the best boon that you wish for. Bharadwaja said, O Lord, who is master of the past and future times, grant me the boon of telling me how people are liberated from their miseries. Brahma said, go to your teacher Valmiki to complete the faultless Ramayana that he has undertaken to write. By hearing this work, men will overcome their many errors in the same way as the bridge that was built by Rama, who was filled with all good qualities. Allow men to cross the sea to Lanka. Valmiki said, saying this, Brahma, the supreme maker of all beings, accompanied Bharadwaja to my hermitage. I eagerly welcomed the god with the arga offerings of water and the like, when the Lord of Truth spoke to me for the good of all creatures. Brahma said, do not, O sage, give up your understanding or undertaking until its final completion. No pain ought to be spared to make the history of Rama as faultless as it ought to be. By this work of yours, men will pass over this repetitive history of the world, samsara, in the same manner as one crosses the sea in a vessel. Again, the uncreated Brahma said to me, I come to tell you this very thing, that you complete the work for the benefit of mankind. Then, O king, in a moment the god disappeared from my sacred hermitage, just as a wave subsides in water. I struck with wonder at the god's disappearance. Then, composing my mind, I asked Bharadwaja, "Tell me, Bharadwaja, what did Brahma tell me in the hermitage?" Bharadwaja answered, "The god commanded you to complete the Ramayana for the good of men, and as it means for them to cross over the gulf of the world. Now, sir," continued Bharadwaja, "explain to me how the great-minded Rama and his brother Bharata conducted themselves amidst the troubles of this world. Tell me also how Satruga, Lakshman, and the renowned Sita, and all those who followed Rama, and also the ministers and their highly intelligent sons, conducted themselves on the earth. Tell me clearly how they escaped all the miseries of this world, so that I may do the same for the rest of mankind." Being thus respectfully addressed by Bharadwaja, I was led, O great king, to carry out the request of my Lord Brahma and narrate the Ramayana to him. I said, "Listen, my son, Bharadwaja, I will tell you all that you have asked. By hearing, you will become able to cast away the impurity of errors. You are wise, and you have managed yourself in the manner of the blissful and lotus-eyed Rama, with a mind free from worldly attachments. It was by this means that Lakshman, Bharata, the great-minded Shatrughna, Kausalya, Sita, Sumitra, as well as Dasharatha, with Kritsastra and the two friends of Rama, and Vashishta and Vamadeva, and the 8 ministers of state, as well as many others, reached the summit of knowledge. The 8 ministers of Rama, Drishta, Jayanta, Vasa, Satya, Vijaya, Vibhishana, Sushena, and Hanuman, and also Indrajit, are said to have been equally dispassionate in their minds and content with what was their lot. They are great souls, free in their lives. Well, my son, if you follow the manner in which these men observed sacrificial rites, gave and received their offerings, and how they lived and thought, you are at once freed from the turmoil of life. One fallen in this boundless ocean of the world may enjoy the bliss of liberation by the magnanimity of his soul. He shall not come across grief or destination, but shall remain ever satisfied by being freed from the fever of anxiety. So we have a few interesting points here to refer to. One, in verse 29, he's describing how an individual who has achieved moksha lives in the world. their minds are equally dispassionate. They are dispassionate in their minds. Now, what is passion? When the mind has passion, what is that driven by? It's driven by karmic traces. Karmic traces create a rajasic, which is passion or energy, or pitta, when we are referring to Ayurvedic medicine and the three gunas. And it creates the impulse to do things. It is, as we mentioned yesterday, similar to a trail or a rut in an old-fashioned phonograph record. When the needle traverses this rut, it vibrates and reproduces the music, just like when the mind follows a thread of a karmic trace. It vibrates and reproduces the energy, the memory, the experience, the mood, feelings of that particular discordant act that created conflict in the universe at the time that it was created. And then that conflict is again repeated. So the karmic traces and the ego, which is just an emergence of the karmic traces, are there only to create conflict in the mind, conflict in the life. That's the nature of karmic traces, individual karmic traces. And the second statement, content with what was their lot. That is the concept of acceptance. As long as we're alive as individual human being dream creatures in this massive, colossal dream of the universe, this body is animated by karmic traces. Now, some karmic traces we mentioned are rajasic, creating overt action, making us want to consume a certain food or visit a certain place or become related or involved with a certain individual. These are all inspired by karmic traces. It also creates tamasic influence. Tamasic influence is that which is responsible for inaction or sleep, in which there is no awareness in the mind of sleeping. And karmic traces have also some slight sattvic influence. In the days gone by, in the past, we have created all sorts of actions. Some of them have been almost in accord with the divine will, but they have been tainted by some aspect of individual karmic traces. There is a profit motive in performing the act, basically. Anytime we perform an act with an idea somewhere in the mind that by doing this, I will achieve this. By doing this, I will benefit in this way. Then that is an act, even though quite in alignment with divine karmic traces, will create yet again another karmic trace. Because why? We are not connected with and observing and witnessing the actions from the silent witness. Now, when we are able to witness all activities of the body from the silent witness, and the body is performing all kinds of activities that may be either the unwinding of residual karmic traces or may be flowing with the divine karmic traces. In both cases, we are not creating more karmic traces to deal with in the future. But if we're not connected with the silent witness, when we're acting, then who are we connected with? The ego, right? And when we're connected with the ego, we are connected with that energy source made up of karmic traces. So whatever we do, no matter how wonderful it is, how beneficial it is to all of humanity, it is tainted by the ego, by karmic traces, and therefore it creates more karmic trace. Now the karmic trace that it creates is something that when it reenacts, it's like a beautiful symphony being recorded on the vinyl of the old-fashioned recording devices. The same mechanism is there, the same root is there, the same needle is passing over the rut and vibrating, but it's producing beautiful music that is in alignment with natural law. So we find some people then operating from their more refined sattvic karmic traces. In the Jyotish, we see there are two sections. In the first section, all the positive karmic traces. In the second section, all the negative karmic traces. It's those positive karmic traces in the first section that we're talking about here. They're still karmic traces, but they are supporting, uplifting, and providing an influence to the individual life and to the environment that is supporting and uplifting to the entire universe. But they're still karmic traces. So those are the sattvic karmic traces. Now those sattvic karmic traces can easily be confused with actions purely inspired by divine karmic traces, because they are in such great synchrony with those divine karmic traces. And we use that, we favor those positive karmic traces on our path to self-realization, because by favoring those, by eliminating the negative ones, by balancing the negative ones, it gives us an increasing ability to move with the winds of the positive karmic traces in a direction that will ultimately result in our self-realization. But at some point, we have to give up the positive ones as well. When we are in a state of acceptance, then we're accepting everything, the positive and the negative. If we find ourselves only wanting to accept the positive and to shun and avoid the negative, then we know we're not established in the silent witness. The ego can create a false sense of being established in the silent witness. This is a rather significant danger. The ego is extremely difficult to eliminate because it is formed of all the karmic traces, including the positive one. And when all the negative or most of the negative karmic traces are balanced, the individual left only with the positive, he can act and appear to be an enlightened person. But then at the end of the life, not being attached solely to the silent witness, comes back and lives another life. So as we advance on the path of self-realization, it's important to realize that we can delude ourselves into believing we're connected with the silent witness, particularly in activity when we're not. Remember, the quality of the silent witness is timelessness. There is no urgency of time when we're connected with the silent witness. We are an eternal being at that point. So if we're observing the world and we think, I'm here in the silent witness observing all and feeling very content, but we still have a sense of time urgency, that's a signal that the ego has taken over the role of the silent witness. Now, in the Ramayana, which is mentioned here, the very important Vedic literature of the Ramayana, which I encourage everyone to read many times, it is such important information. One thing that occurs is a final battle between Ram and Ravana. Ravana is pure ego. He is the personification of all of our individual karmic traces. And Ram, who is incarnation of the divine, God himself on earth, is having an extremely difficult time, apparently, slaying Ravana. This is an important point. It is the slaying of Ravana that is required to achieve self-realization, enlightenment, moksha. And even the creator of this universe has trouble dismantling this web of individual karmic traces built into the dream creature known as Ravana. He has to shoot repeatedly arrows at this collection of individual karmic traces. Now, Ravana had a very interesting ability. If someone severed one of his heads, he had many heads, by the way, and if someone severed one of his heads, it would immediately grow back. And so every time Ram would shoot an arrow at Ravana and sever one of his heads with an arrow, it grew back. Well, the arrow is always symbolic in Vedic literature of a thought. A thought has direction and energy. An arrow is a very good metaphor for a thought. The bow, that is the potential energy behind the ability of the arrow to fly through the air, is the mind. So in the mind, we know how to do one thing: think a thought. This is what makes us human beings. This is the gift of having a human nervous system. We can think a thought. It is also like a curse, because this ability to think a thought gives us the ability to think a thought that is not in accord with the divine will. Therefore, we create karma. Yeah, we can create karma by just thinking it. We don't have to actually do something. We only have to think it. That's how delicate this is. We can literally think about doing something that is in opposition or not in congruence with divine will, and that creates a karmic trace. If we actually act it out and allow the body to do this deed that is harmful to some other aspect of the universe, then that creates a karmic trace as well. That karmic trace created by action of the body is a stronger one than the karmic trace created by just thinking about the action of the body. But both create the karmic trace. But when we think a thought that we're told has only harmonious influences throughout the universe, then we're safe. That is a good thought to be thinking. It's difficult from the level of the ego, dominated by all the karmic traces, to know what is a good thought and what is not a good thought. A good thought meaning one that is supporting of the entire universe. But remember, anytime we involve the ego, and even if we have a thought that is good for the whole universe, and the ego is in charge of engineering that thought and projecting it, that thought is going to create sattvic karmic traces, isn't it? This is a very delicate situation that we've got ourselves into. Many people write about this path to enlightenment as being razor sharp. We have to somehow tread on a razor sharp path so easy to fall off one way or the other, like being on a tightrope. And the only solution to this whole thing is cultivating our connection and our total immersion in becoming the silent witness. That's the only way we can be for a moment or an hour or a day when we're not connected with the ego. So that's why when we learn meditation, first thing we learn is dharana, how to think a thought that is completely in accord with the entire universe, the mantra. And there are just a few of those. It's not every word that you can imagine is a mantra. Just a few words, a few syllables are guaranteed to be of that quality. But here is the danger. If we don't learn dhyan, what are we doing as we're thinking this mantra? We are attached to the ego, we're thinking the mantra, and we are creating a most wonderful, sattvic, spiritual ego that is standing in the way, blocking entirely our self-realization. So, very big danger there. When we're learning meditation, we don't stop with just dharana. If we do, if we don't catch the significance of being established in the silent witness, dhyan, we're going to waste yet another human life. We're not going to reach moksha. Moksha is defined as being permanently established, connected with, and observing all using the senses of the silent witness. Now that's an interesting thing to think about. The silent witness has senses, doesn't it? Now wait a minute, senses seem to be related to the body. So how is that possible? How could something that is beyond the body have things that are related to having a body? We know the body has 5 senses: seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling. And these 5 senses are like reflections of absolute senses. When I say the word absolute, what I'm trying to convey is they are not associated with anything in this universe. So now we're getting to something very interesting about the silent witness. While the silent witness can be contacted within this universe, we only have to transcend beyond the conscious thinking mind and become established in the subconscious mind, in the pranamaya kosha, in order to find and connect with the silent witness. We can't find it in the conscious thinking mind. If we think we have found it in the conscious thinking mind, if we think because the conscious thinking mind is not thinking for a moment, and there's a little opening a little bit of silence in the conscious thinking mind. If we think that is the silent witness, then we're deluded. We are connecting with the silence of the ego. That is a totally false, silent witness. We have to transcend beyond the physical body to touch the toe of the silent witness. A little bit of it is there in the subconscious mind, in the pranamaya kosha. But once we connect with it, it is possible to perceive the entirety of it. We're only touching the toe of the silent witness. But as soon as we touch the toe of the silent witness, and that is there in our subconscious mind, we are immediately flooded with the entirety of the silent witness. That's all that's necessary. Just touch the toe of the silent witness and we become established in, we become the silent witness. And at first, the experience is one of timelessness, eternity. No need whatsoever of anything. We are beyond everything. And that is the essence of contentment. That is the essence of acceptance. Because from the perspective of the silent witness, there is only acceptance. So we spend a lot of time talking about the silent witness because that's all there is to talk about. Only the silent witness is important here. Because the silent witness is that which is beyond ignorance. Everything else is ignorance. The reading of the Yoga Vasishta is ignorance. The words in the Yoga Vasishta are ignorance. The story in the Yoga Vasishta is ignorance. But if we are attached to the silent witness while reading the Yoga Vasishta, the magical thing happens. The ignorance in the Yoga Vasishta is based on divine ignorance. How's that for an interesting oxymoron? Divine ignorance. Divine karmic traces. So when we read anything in the Yoga Vasishta, it is not the silent witness. It is something in the relative universe. And therefore it must be ignorance. But it is divine ignorance. It is divine karmic traces. And so if we are established in the silent witness while reading the Yoga Vasishta, what's happening? Our attention is beyond the physical, in at least the pranamaya kosha. What that means is the words, the information, the knowledge constructs, that's what the words are. They form into sentences, and the sentences create in the mind a knowledge construct. These knowledge constructs can then touch the knowledge constructs in the pranamaya kosha. And the knowledge constructs in the Pranamaya Kosha are very much emotional type of knowledge constructs. Stories are a very good way of evoking emotions. So the entire Yoga Vasishta, very much of it, 90% of it is stories, story after story after story. Because Vasishta knew that most of the time, as we are connecting with the silent witness and still having this desire for liberation, and we are neither wholly ignorant nor quite conversant with divine knowledge, that we are probably in the Pranamaya Kosha. So a good portion of this is written to resonate with that level of knowledge constructs and balance them. But there's also some pure knowledge constructs we're going to run into, and they're sprinkled throughout the stories even, that balance knowledge constructs on the level of the Manomaya Kosha. So as we continue our identification with the silent witness, the tendency is naturally to go deeper into the silent witness. And as we go deeper into the silent witness, we are carried deeper into our subtle bodies to the level of the Manomaya Kosha. And when we balance karma on the level of Manomaya Kosha, we have eliminated it entirely from our life. So that is like the root or the ground's basis of all karma is in the Manomaya Kosha. If we don't balance it there, it's like cutting off a weed at the surface of the earth. In a few days, it grows back. So when we balance karmic traces on the physical level, on the prana level, they grow back. And we find ourselves with the same task that we thought we had just accomplished. But if we balance them on the level of Manomaya Kosha, they do not grow back. And eventually we are able to open up a tunnel in the mountain ranges of karmic traces that leads to an opening where we can observe the divine karmic traces that allows us to remain established always in the level of moksha level 1. All right, so an interesting chapter, the reason for writing the Ramayana, to point out quite literally the connection with the silent witness is the only solution that leads to self-realization. Now, chapter 3 for tomorrow, Valmiki explains desires and describes Rama's pilgrimage to Bharadwaja. Jai Gurudev.